Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, Nairo Quintana is back. We will take a closer look at his dominant ride up Mont Ventoux at the Tour de la Provence. We've also got the Tour Colombia 2.1, the Vuelta Murcia, the Clasica de Almeria, Trofeo La Guelia, Cyclocross, the Atlas Mountain Race, and some great news for the Cycling Alliance. Let's start though with the Tour de la Provence, a 4-day stage race in southern France which had a great field this year with no fewer than 14 World Tour teams taking part. It was a team one division below though who would dominate proceedings. Arkea Samsic took the opening stage and here's how that happened.
Jakub Mareczko, 24 right position on the inside for Mareczko. Mareczko kicks straight down the left hand side of the road. Bouhanni's trying to come through. Has Mareczko at the front. Bouhanni and Mareczko shoulder to shoulder. Where's it going to go? It's going to Nacer Bouhanni.
Not quite sure what that lady was doing crossing the road at the last minute, rider safety being called into question yet again, but regardless, a second victory this season for Bouhanni, who didn't win a single race last year. The following day was the first of two uphill finishes. Alexander Vlasov showed everybody a clean pair of wheels there, coming to the line almost 30 seconds clear of Wilco Kelderman of Team Sunweb. Robert Gesink could only manage 25th on the stage, but he was very excited about the Strava art that it produced. Looks like it was a hard one, doesn't it? The overall classification all hinged on the third stage though, finishing as it did 2/3 of the way up Mont Ventoux at Chalet Reynard. It was a slight risk for the organisation to include that climb in mid-February, but it was a gamble that paid off with unseasonably good weather for all of the riders. And it produced one of the best performances that I think we've seen from Nairo Quintana for quite some time. His team set him up absolutely perfectly. The Frenchman Maxime Bouet did what he described as a 1-minute sprint on the front. Warren Barguil and winner Annacona continued where he'd left off. And when the latter swung off with 7 kilometres to go, Quintana went. And when I say he went, he really went. Sepp Kuss hung on the longest, but the Colombian's attack was next level stuff. Or previous level stuff. This was actually vintage Quintana, the Quintana that we all love to see. The gap continued to grow pretty much all the way to the line, and he crossed that line with almost a minute and a half to spare over second place Alexei Lutsenko of Team Astana. Now it is only February, and only the Tour de la Provence, so was that really the Quintana of old? Well, I think the data suggests it is. Up to the point at which Kuss had to let go of Quintana, he'd averaged 414 watts for 6 minutes and 44 seconds. That was coming from Amati Pirali on Twitter, who's been analysing his power file. As well as how long it took Quintana to reach Chalet Reynard from the foot of the climb. 28 minutes and 12 seconds, the fastest ever recorded. Now that one is a bit of a red herring of course, as the riders normally continue for another 7 kilometres to the peak of Mont Ventoux and pace themselves accordingly. But nevertheless, that to me felt like a really strong statement from Nairo Quintana, and it was fantastic to see. I don't think I was alone in thinking that his move to the French squad Arkea Samsic might not have been the wisest idea, and in fact most of you on a recent poll over on the GCN app said his best years were behind him. But he's proving me, and anyone else who thought that way, completely wrong. And it might just be the fresh start that both he and Bouhanni needed. Certainly looks that way at the moment, and long may it continue. The fourth and final stage saw the breakaway survive. Just Owain of Team Ineos outsprinted Matthias Brendley to take his second career win, and the first win of the year for Team Ineos, leaving CCC as the only World Tour team yet to get off the mark this year. No doubt about the general classification though. Nairo Quintana safely crossed the line in the first bunch. Surprisingly, that marked his first stage race win in nearly 3 years, since winning Tirreno Adriatico back in 2017. And it also marks the 15th stage race win of his career, which puts him third amongst active pro riders, behind Alejandro Valverde and Chris Froome. And just to add another illustrious win to his palmares, it is he who is this week's GCN Rider of the Week. Now before we move on, a quick note to say that we will have daily worldwide highlights of the Vuelta Algarve and Vuelta Andalucia this week, starting on Wednesday. In the former, Geraint Thomas and Vincenzo Nibali will make their season debuts. They will be up against the likes of Remco Evenepoel and Mathieu van der Poel, whilst over in Spain and Andalucia, it's Jakob Fuglsang, Mikel Landa and Enric Mas who will headline the start list. Moving on now to the Classic de Almeria down in Spain, which finished in a big bunch sprint. Pascal Ackermann perfectly timing his acceleration and getting the better of Alexander Kristoff and European champion Elia Viviani. That's back-to-back wins in that race now for Ackermann, and he's the first rider to have done that in its 35-year history. That particular race came hot off the heels of the Vuelta Murcia, a 2-day stage race which saw a break finish 16 minutes clear of the bunch on the opening day. Xandro Murcia of Circus Wanty-Gobert taking the win, and also, in the end, the overall. The final stage was won in a solo fashion by Astana's Luis Leon Sanchez. The other major stage race taking place last week was the Tour Colombia 2.1. It really is quite astounding to see how big cycling as a sport is in Colombia, and also how many world-class pros they've now got. In fact, they won every single road stage. UAE Team Emirates' Juan Sebastian Milano took 3 of those in bunt sprints, edging out a very frustrated Jose Alvaro Hodge on 2 of them. The GC, though, was defined by the opening day's team time trial, which was dominated by EF Pro Cycling. They won that day by a whopping 45 seconds from Deceuninck Quickstep and Team Ineos, and given the pedigree of the climbers within their team there, it gave very little hope for anybody else to take the lead from them. In fact, on the first hilltop finish, Sergio Higuita won, putting them in an even more commanding position, and so the only chance anyone had left was the final day, the toughest of them all, finishing at over 3,200 metres above sea level. Team Ineos rode as hard as they possibly could, setting a very high pace up the final climb and shelling a lot of riders, all except for those that they needed to shell. Try as he might, Egan Bernal couldn't shake off Dani Martinez and Sergio Higuita, both of whom came past him before the line, Martinez taking the stage, Higuita the general classification. And such was their dominance there, they had 3 riders on the final general classification podium, with Caicedo finishing in 3rd. That, looking at the third moment on Twitter, was the first overall stage race win for the team since the 2015 Tour of Utah. Now, before we finish with the race, a quick chapeau to 24-year-old Torsten Klein of the UNO-X development team. He was the only non-South American to finish in the top 10, coming home eventually in 9th place. Down in Italy, Giulio Ciccone took the Italian one-day season opener, the Trofeo Laigueglia. The Italian crossed the line solo, 32 seconds ahead of 19-year-old Eritrean Binyam Girmay. Apologies for the mispronunciation there. That young man, though, is showing some serious promise. He won 3 stages of the Tropicala Amisa Bongo at the start of the season. And finally, for the road this week, I know it's been a busy one, the New Zealand Elite National Championships. And it will be the Flying Mullet, Shane Archibald, and Niamh Fisher-Black who will be flying the New Zealand flags this year, having won their respective national road championships yesterday. And before we finish completely with the road, over on the GCN app, we've got a new poll which we'd like you to vote on. Which team has the most reason to be pleased with themselves so far in 2020? You have 5 choices: EF Pro Cycling, Lotto Soudal, Arkea Samsic, Deceuninck Quickstep, or finally NTT Pro Cycling. You'll find a link to that poll in the description down below this video. Right, moving on to Cyclocross, and both the Super Prestige and Ethias Cross Series wrapped up at the weekend. The latter marked the final race for many riders, but it was delayed as Northern Europe was battered by Storm Dennis. Once the fallen tree had been dealt with, it was again the Worst and Alvarado show. On this occasion, it came down to a minute error that handed a small advantage to Alvarado, who seized the opportunity to jump clear for victory. Corne van Kessel got the best start in the elite men's race, but it would be Eli Iserbyt who launched himself down one of the epic descents to go clear. After steadily picking his way to the front of the chasing group, Iserbyt's own arch nemesis Tom Pidcock gave chase, with Toon Aerts close behind, and this would ultimately be the order over the finish line. Hulst, incidentally, is one race that will form part of the reformed UCI Cyclocross World Cup next winter. Now, barring disaster, Sailing del Carmen Alvarado had the Telenet Super Prestige all but sewn up going into the final round. Second place overall, Yara Castelline was racing with fractures in the protrusions in her vertebrae after a crash in Maldegem, but after being given the all clear, she was valiant in defending her overall position as she'd worked so hard towards all season long. At the front of the race though, Alvarado's finish has definitely come on strong towards the end of this season. She outkicked Anne-Marie Vorst again, who in turn would also be passed by Denise Betzema, who held the momentum coming towards the finish line. The Elite Men's Series was still really anybody's game though, with 1 point separating the top 2 in the overall classification, Laurens Sweeck and Eli Iserbyt. Now, Middelkerke always makes for great racing, and for a while it looked like it might be Tom Pidcock's day. That was until an eye-watering descent where he went in slightly too hot and probably needed an ice pack after losing his feet and coming down on the top tube. Ouch. Belgian champion Laurens Sweeck would ultimately go clear and in the process win the series. Alvarado and Sweeck both picked up €30,000 each for their season's work in that series. Now, our alternative event of the week this week is the pedal-led Atlas Mountain Race, an unsupported one-stage race over the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, totaling 1,145 kilometres across gravel roads, single and double track. That looks absolutely spectacular, I must say. And as we record this, the race is being led by Sofiane Sahili, who's chosen not to sleep in the first 40 hours. He's now 650 kilometres through the adventure. Christian Meyer, former pro cyclist and now owner of the Service Course Gravel Experience Company, was the early leader, but appears to have succumbed to saddle sores and multiple punctures. Currently sitting in second is James Hayden, whilst bringing up the rear is 73-year-old William Caldwell, who appears to be having the time of his life. We'll update on the final results of that event this time next week. Now, in other news, a couple of bits of great news, in fact, for women's cycling. First up, Bulls Duhlmans, who've been the most successful women's team of the last, probably decade really. They've now secured a new main sponsor. Many had feared that it could be the end of the team, but SD Works have secured the future of it until at least the end of 2024, having stepped in as the headline sponsor. And then the other piece of good news is with the Cycling Alliance, the union looking after the interest of women's pro racing. They have secured £75,000 of funding from clothing manufacturer Rafa, which they'll use over the next 3 years to implement a new 7-point plan. Marty caught up with Iris Slappendel earlier to find out more.
Iris, thanks for joining us. For those that are not familiar yet, give us a little bit of background on the Cyclist Alliance and the work that you're doing.
So the Cyclist Alliance is a union, an international union just for female cyclists, and we've founded it 3 years ago or 2 years ago. What we're doing is we support riders day to day with legal assistance, dispute assistance. We're helping them with their contracts. We're giving them guidance on salaries, that kind of things. We have other benefits that they can make use of, like we give them a free concussion protocol test. We have a nutritionist, we have mental support, we have a mentor program. So that's one side of the work we were doing. It's really supporting them with representing the riders at the stakeholders in the sport. So like the UCI, race organizers, national federations. And trying to make their voice heard. Yeah.
And we saw this last week that you've had some funding from Rafa. How much is this going to help the work that you're doing?
It's going to help us a lot, because at the moment we've always been working with people just helping pro bono on a very, very limited budget. So the only source of income is the membership of the riders. And as you can imagine, I think 61% of the riders earns less than 15,000 euros a year, which is below the minimum salary of the most countries. So it's kind of hard to ask riders to pay a membership. So we've been working on a really tight budget, and the funding is going to help us to expand our work. So we will be able to travel more to races, to visit the riders, to educate it, because that's a big part of what we do, educating riders on their rights. And then on the other hand, we on a very practical way, we've already installed a dedicated ethics officer. So we will have one person that's gonna dedicate, that has a dedicated job in just being there for the riders. They can call her, they can email her with any questions on, sexual intimidation, of abuse of mistreatment, and I think that's a really great thing. Another practical thing we've been working on, and we can realize with the funding, is a management platform. So a platform on our website that our members can log into, and they find, for example, salary guidelines. They can have a rider agent making a health check of the contract. They can get feedback and advice on the contract. They even can get help negotiating the contract. So really expanding the service we are already doing and adding more services on top of that.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. Keep it up.
Thanks. We will.
Great to see them really pressing forward with their plans, isn't it? Meanwhile, the UAE Tour has changed its route at the last minute. The Jebel Hafit climb will now feature not just once, but twice, concluding stages 3 and 5. We have no idea why. Movistar last week officially announced the release of Andre Amador from the team. He'd signed a letter of intent to renew his contract last year before deciding he'd rather go to Team Ineos, which is where he'll now be this year, now that drawn-out battle has concluded. A couple of injury updates now. First up, Tom Dumoulin's return from injury has been delayed yet again. He was due to start in Valenciana earlier on this month, but he skipped that and will now apparently skip Tirreno Adriatico and Milano Sanremo too, as he tries to get back to full health and top form. And it doesn't get much better for his team Jumbo-Visma, as Steven Kruijswijk has also been sidelined. He was suffering with a knee injury at the start of the year, and although the team thought he'd recover enough to be leader at Paris-Nice at the start of next month, they've now decided to postpone his season start until the Vuelta Catalunya. Andre Greipel already has made a season debut, of course, at the Tour Down Under, but will now face a lengthy 3-month absence from competition after dislocating his shoulder in a training crash. Now, it's not the first time he's had this particular injury, so he will know full well what to expect in his recovery. He has already had surgery on it, as has Matteo Moschetti after that horrific crash we talked about on last week's show. Also, great to see Israel Startup Nation's Rory Sutherland now outside on his bike. Feels like a very quick recovery for him, doesn't it? But I can assure you, that would have felt like an incredibly slow recovery for Rory himself. And finally, you may remember the name Tanguy Turgis. In 2018, he became the youngest finisher of Paris-Roubaix in over 50 years, but later had to prematurely retire from the sport due to a heart condition. Well, unfortunately, recent tests have revealed that his older brother Jimmy has exactly the same symptoms and therefore will also have to hang up his wheels for the good of his own health. There is still one Turgis in the peloton though, middle brother Anthony, who is with Total Direct Energie. Right, that is it for this week's Racing News Show. I will be back next week to wrap up all of the races, including Algarve and Lucia, and the catchily titled Tour Cycliste International du Var et des Alpes Maritimes. I'll see you then. Bye for now.